Hi class, and welcome to Unit 5, Social, Emotional, and Moral Development. This lecture will help you understand adolescent social, emotional, and moral development. In this lecture, we will be discussing the social emotional development in adolescence, Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, classroom strategies for addressing social emotional issues in adolescence, moral development, and Kohlbergs stages of moral development, as well as classroom strategies. Let's begin by discussing social emotional development. We need to understand that as children improve their cognitive skills, they are also developing self-concepts, or how they see themselves, ways of interacting with others, and attitudes towards the world. Understanding personal and social development is critical to your ability to motivate, teach, and successfully interact with students at various ages. If you think about your own childhood and you think about progressing into adolescence, you probably saw the pattern that's depicted here. That is, children progress through relationships in a predictable pattern. When a child is young, he or she interacts primarily with parents. You see that at the center circle. Or perhaps with other family that might include brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins. As the child ages, they start interacting with non-related adults, so perhaps teachers, coaches, counselors. By late elementary school, and certainly by middle school, they're interacting primarily with their peers. The peers become increasingly important in adolescence. So in adolescence, we see a waning influence of parents and other family members. We see an increasing influence of peers. This leads adolescents to make more social comparisons. That is, they compare themselves with their peers to see how they rank. And they will do this on everything, on looks, on height, on weight, on grades, and more. In adolescence, we see less respect for authority, including parents and teachers. Psychologists believe that this decreasing respect for authority is a necessary stage for an individual to break off and form their own identity. We also see the first appearance of reflectivity, or the ability to think about what's going on in one's own mind and study oneself. So, in early childhood, you see primarily a disregard for self-reflection. Young children are not particularly self-reflective. But as students age, and particularly as they go into adolescence, you'll see them stop more and more to consider how others see them, to consider what type of student they are, what type of friend they are, and more. Reflectivity is looking at oneself as if through a mirror. Let's discuss an important theory related to social emotional development. Erik Erikson. Notice how his name is spelled. There's no C in Erik. Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Erikson hypothesized that people pass through 8 psychosocial stages in their lifetimes. At each stage, there are crises or critical issues to be resolved. Most people resolve each psychosocial crisis satisfactorily and put it behind them to take on new challenges. But some people do not completely resolve these crises and must continue to deal with them later in life. So here you see Erik Erikson, and you also see the first 4 of his 8 stages. Let's go through each stage. The first stage, at stage 1, occurs at birth to about the age of 1. Please remember that these ages are approximate and not written in stone. Some people pass through them more quickly than others, but remember they are sequential. The first stage is called trust versus mistrust. The name of the stage is also the name of the conflict. So this indicates that a baby must learn to trust others. If a baby cries and is picked up, they'll come to trust their parents or their caretaker to provide milk and warmth and changing of diapers. And so the child will become trusting. They will learn to trust people. If a child is left repeatedly to cry, they may grow up to be fearful and lack trust in others. So this is what we mean by conflict. There's a crisis or a conflict that occurs at each stage that is either resolved and with a good outcome, or it's not resolved and it has a bad outcome. Stage 2 occurs between the ages of about 2 to 4, and this is called autonomy versus shame. The big event that's taking place in these years is toilet training. And in that, children learn to be independent if they're successful and they're praised and they're rewarded, or they learn to be fearful and ashamed. So for example, if you have a parent that's potty training a child and the child has an accident and the parent repeatedly shames the child, that child will learn a sense of shame and be afraid to venture out later in life to do things on their own. Autonomy means going out on your own and being able to do things. So you might have an adult that develops very fearfully, a lot of anxiety, afraid to do things, to strike out on their own. If this crisis is resolved successfully, you generally get an individual who's autonomous. Stage 3 occurs between the ages of 4 and 5, and it's called initiative versus guilt. This is the age when children are exploring their environments. They're climbing, they're playing on the playground, they're learning about other children. And if a child is treated positively during this stage, he'll learn to take initiative. Initiative means he'll want to do things and start things on his own. But if he's punished or scolded too frequently, he may develop guilt, and he may hang back or feel guilty about things. So this is an example of a crisis that is and is not resolved at this stage. Stage 4 occurs between the ages of 5 to 12, and it's called industry versus inferiority. Some of your students may be in the tail end of this stage. This is when the child learns to go to school, learns to be productive, and they learn the pleasures and benefits of productivity, so that feeling you get when you do something well. If you're constantly failing at school, if your parents are constantly yelling at you about your grades, or maybe they're not, maybe they're completely ignoring you and your grades are getting worse, maybe the teacher is negative about you all the time, you could develop a sense of inferiority. You might feel like you're not as good at school as your classmates, and this may transfer later into life with a sense of inferiority overall, that you're not as good as other people. So if it's resolved correctly or well, you'll probably develop a sense of industry. You like to work to get things done. If not, you may develop a sense of inferiority. Let's go on and review the last 4 stages. Stage 5 occurs in the ages between 13 and 19. It's called identity versus confusion. And this is where most of your students will be. Remember, I said this is when adolescents turn to peers and they become the most important thing to them. An adolescent who develops a firmer sense of who he is will become socially adept and feel good about themselves, they'll have a firm sense of identity. If not, They may become confused about their social identity and may not feel that they fit in. So this is the stage where you see groups forming and cliques forming, because social relationships are a primary focus of adolescence at this stage. Stage 6 occurs between the ages of 20 to 40. It's called intimacy versus isolation. This is when the young adult experiences a strong urge to bond with others, including romantic bonds. So they'll either solve that successfully, perhaps they'll go through a series of relationships and then settle down with a life partner, either in marriage or outside of it. Or they might not be able to do that. Maybe some of the earlier crises weren't resolved and they're not able to find a mate and they experience isolation. Stage 7 occurs between the ages of 40 and 65. This is called generativity versus stagnation. This is when the adult is learning to nurture and care for others, especially younger people. This is when many people have children or go into careers to help other people, like teaching. Generativity means that you're caring for others. You're generating care for others. If you don't do this, you may experience stagnation or feeling that your life is not progressing, that you have no purpose. Stage 8, 65 and older, is called integrity versus despair. And this is when the older adult learns to value integrity and wisdom, or comes to feel that life has meant little, leading to despair. This generally occurs around the age of retirement. It may be that the adult looks back and sees a series of severed relationships with their children, with their spouse, with their parents, feels like life has treated them poorly, and they fall into despair. Or they may look back and they're pleased with what they've done, and that gives them a sense of integrity. How does understanding these stages affect you? Well, as a teacher, you're responsible not just for the academic achievement of your children. You also strive to develop young people who are socially and emotionally healthy. That's part of our jobs as teachers. Problems of adolescence may be viewed through the lens of Erikson's theory. Let's see how I mean. First, let's discuss some of the social-emotional consequences of adolescence. Adolescents experience emotional disorders such as depression, hopelessness, anger, and anxiety. They may experience bullying such as taunting, harassment, and aggression towards weaker and friendless peers. They may be at risk for dropping out, leading to school failure, retention, assignment to special education, poor attendance, depression. They may be at risk for drug and alcohol abuse, and that's often connected to school or social failure. They may be at risk of delinquency, and this is especially associated with lower achieving students. They may be at risk of pregnancy and or sexually transmitted diseases, and they may be at risk for sexual identity issues because they may not understand the feelings that are developing in their bodies. Many of these behaviors may be traced back to Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. Let's take an example and see what we mean. Let's take the issue of bullying. Remember that we said that ages 13 to 19, most adolescents are in a stage called identity versus confusion. This is when adolescents develop a firmer sense of who they are, or they are confused about their social identity and how they fit into things. Adolescents without a firm sense of belonging and who others may view as odd may fall prey to bullying. So do you see how the application is aligned with the summary of the stage? What can be done? What strategies align with Erickson's theory? What can you as a classroom teacher do? First of all, you need to make sure that you get to know your students. Ask and talk about their interests. One way you can do this is by giving out interest surveys at the start of class, at the start of a semester. Make sure your classroom is a safe place. Have rules posted and follow through to make your classroom a safe place with no hitting, no derogatory talk, etc. Try to establish a relationship with them. Be a person. I used to put up a bulletin board, part of a bulletin board that was just about me so that they could get to know me as a person. Pet pictures, pictures of the special people in my life, vacation pictures. Let students know about your own mistakes. This might surprise you, but the more we talk to students about the errors we've made, the more we help students understand that it's okay to make mistakes. People survive them. Have an open door policy. Let your students know that you are there for them. Incorporate stories of struggle through speakers and readings. So don't just have students believe that everything comes out right the first time, or everyone gets something the first time they try for it. Help them understand that sometimes it's a struggle. Be on the lookout for social-emotional concerns. Be on the lookout, for example, if a student is crying. Be on the lookout if a student has a bruise, or if a student's grades suddenly drop. These are all indications of social-emotional problems. And know when to refer to a school psychologist or counselor. If you suspect serious depression and/or anxiety, get in touch with a counselor. Now let's go back to our example with bullying. We said that bullying can be traced back to if an adolescent doesn't develop a firm sense of self-identity, or identity versus confusion. One strategy that could be aligned with that stage and with that application would be to get to know students to be aware of their situations. Watch out in the hallway for bullying and establish a no bullying classroom. Let's turn now to the subject of adolescents' moral development. But first, a word about moral development. So far in the course, we've talked about cognitive development and social-emotional development. What is moral development? Well, morality has to do with the rules by which we live. So we don't go out and we don't kill people, for example. Society could not function without rules that tell people how to communicate with one another and how to treat one another. Just as children differ from adults in cognitive and personal development, they also differ in their moral reasoning. Let's discuss Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Kohlberg suggested that individuals progress through 3 different levels of moral development. The first level is called pre-conventional. At the pre-conventional level, an individual has no sense of an internal moral principle, and this generally takes place from about birth until the age of 9. This level is divided up into 2 stages. The first stage is called obedience and punishment. At this stage, the child, generally a very young child, wants to avoid punishment, and he defers to authority. So, for example, if a child is trying to steal a cookie from a cookie jar and the parent says no, the child probably feels guilty and wants to obey the parent because they want to avoid being punished. The second stage at this level is called individualism and exchange. This generally occurs around the age of preschool. At this stage, the child's figured out that they want to do what's best for themselves, and they sort of have a tit-for-tat mentality. So, for example, if If the child wants a toy and another child's playing in the sandbox with that toy, the child might just go over and take the toy, doing what's best for oneself. The second stage is called conventional. At this stage, individuals are developing internal moral principles. Remember, at the pre-conventional stage, they had none. But now, older children, around the age of 9, start to develop some guiding principles that they live by morally. This is also divided into 2 stages, and it runs from about age of 9 or 10 into adulthood. Many adults never progress past the conventional stage. We'll talk about the next stage in a little bit. But for now, know that many adults are still at the conventional stage. The 2 stages within conventional, the first one is called interpersonal relationships, and we actually label it as stage 3 because it's the 3rd stage after individualism and exchange. At this stage, individuals want to do what's best for significant others, for peers, for example. You'll recall that peers are becoming increasingly important at this stage. So they might, for example, offer to let someone copy their homework. They know it's wrong, but they want to do what's best and be seen as a good girl or a good boy. So they value interpersonal relationships. The 4th stage is called authority and social order. At this stage, they want to respect rules and law. They believe that obedience to law is important for society. So as I said, many adults are at this stage, and that's where they say, okay, well, it's wrong to break a law. It's wrong to, for example, cheat on your taxes, or it's wrong to commit murder. And so they do it out of respect for the law. They recognize that without laws, we would have no society. The last level is called the post-conventional stage. At this stage, individuals start to understand universal moral principles. Principles such as human life is sacred, and even if a law contradicts something that's going to endanger a human life, it's not a good law. So, for example, in the 19th century, there were laws making slavery illegal, but the abolitionists had a firm sense of universal moral principles that opposed those laws, and so they would be classified at either stage 5 or 6. Many adolescents and adults never reach this last level, but it is divided up into 2 stages. The first of those stages is called, the 5th stage is called social contracts. And this is where individuals begin to understand that others have different values. And they realize that law is contingent on culture. So whereas in stage 4, an individual might believe all laws are just and good and they should be followed, an individual in stage 5 might start to question some laws in terms of what's the good, what's the universal principle that it is upholding or not upholding. The last stage, and very few people reach this stage, is called universal principles. Think of individuals such as Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and more when you think about individuals at this stage. Mother Teresa might be someone you think of at this stage. These individuals develop internal principles for the good of others, so they're self-sacrificing for the good of others. They give of themselves. They begin to obey those internal principles above the law. They might, for example, not believe in supporting a war, so rather than pay taxes to support a war, they might be willing to go to jail. So stage 6 involves self-sacrifice. What are some classroom issues related to moral development? Most of your students will be at the lower levels of development, or maybe at the conventional level in the authority stage. So you can expect some cheating and plagiarism. And why do students cheat? Why do they copy off others? They may be at a lower level of morality, and they may believe that they want to do what's good for themselves. That tit-for-tat mentality. They may steal for the same reason. They may lie to significant others, to parents, to teachers, in order to avoid unpleasant consequences. They may manipulate others for the same reason, to get what they want. So generally, when you see these behaviors, it means that you're at a stage 3, 2, or 3 level. Now, what can you do to promote moral development in your students? Well, there are some things you can do related to assignments. Let's look at a couple of them. One of the reasons that students cheat or plagiarize is that they feel overwhelmed. They begin to feel that they can't accomplish what you want them to do. So you want to make the assignment more doable. One way to do that is to keep it within the student's zone of proximal development and provide enough scaffolding so that students don't feel overwhelmed. You might break the assignment down. You might provide more instructions or support. You might allow some collaborative work on difficult or complex assignments, so if a student is stuck, they can turn to a peer. You can help students understand the consequences of their actions, of cheating, for example. Point out the consequences and then follow through on those consequences. You can discuss moral dilemmas, and you're going to be working with some of these in this module, such as the trolley problem. Discuss and read about role models such as Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who encouraged civil disobedience, those stage 6 people. Maintain a warm, welcoming attitude towards students, even when providing consequences. I like to say, hate the behavior but love the child. Keep an eye out for bullying and hold bullies accountable. Here's a summary of this lecture. Children pass through a series of stages in which they interact social-emotionally with others. In adolescence, peers play an increasingly important role in social-emotional development. Erikson proposed that individuals pass through 8 stages of social-emotional development. At each stage, a crisis is either resolved, resulting in a positive outcome, or not resolved, resulting in a negative outcome. Adolescents experience a wide range of social-emotional issues that may be viewed through the lens of Erikson's theory. Teachers may use specific strategies that align with Erikson's theory to address these issues. Kohlberg proposed that individuals pass through 8 moral stages of development. Classroom issues related to moral development include cheating, bullying, and more. And again, teachers may use specific strategies that are aligned with Kohlberg's theory to address these issues. Thank you, and I hope this lecture has been helpful.